Hey, folks, and welcome back to Let's Talk Mental Health. I'm Brian Wall, your host with over 2 decades of experience across 4 countries in areas of mental health and addiction, with hopes of promoting awareness for listeners in a way that not only challenges feelings of isolation caused by such issues, but also offers a supportive community where you can connect with others on the same journey to develop a healthier, happier you. Tune in weekly to learn more about how these areas impact your life. The Let's Talk Mental Health podcast is committed to sharing current trends in mental health and wellness by discussing the latest news, research, and insights in the field to expose our unhealthy patterns before they become a way of living. For more information, be sure to follow us on all major social media platforms by searching 24/7 DCT and online at 247dct.org. This week's episode is yet another effort on our behalf to more closely track our tribe and bring awareness to issues like mental health, addiction, general wellness, and everything in between. Let's go ahead and get started with another opportunity to meet a member of the 24/7 DCT family. Jessica Baker is a 2015 graduate of Quincy University with a master's degree in clinical mental health and school counseling. Jessica is a licensed professional counselor in both Missouri and Illinois and is a certified reciprocal alcohol and drug counselor in Missouri. Jessica is trained in EMDR, motivational interviewing, trauma-focused CBT, and co-occurring disorders. Jessica has worked at Preferred Family Healthcare in Missouri since 2014, where she started as a caseworker. Throughout her approximate 9 years at PFH, she served in many roles, including therapist, team leader of the ACTE team, and most recently as a business partner in the continuous quality improvement department, focusing on clinical quality and project and process improvement. She also serves as the 24/7 DCT's clinical program manager in Illinois. Outside of work, Jessica is married to her husband, Will, who is a firefighter. We appreciate his service. And together they have 2 children, Kaylee, I think I'm pronouncing that right, and Liam.
Callie.
Callie, I figured I'd get it wrong. Callie and Liam, super cool names. I'm a name guy. I love that. And Jessica loves to travel, explore the world, attend live music concerts, and try new foods. She's a foodie. She's one of me. She's in my tribe. Welcome aboard, Jessica. How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you taking the time. So, um, today, a topic of interest for me, I was sharing a little bit about a member of my family has gone through the process of EMDR and how that was beneficial to them. And so I wanted to touch a bit on EMDR and what that is and how that can be beneficial for folks. And I think, honestly, personally, I think it's one of the top three, probably most beneficial, most effective therapeutic approaches right now in the field. And I've seen it work magic in my family. And so want to share with our listeners today more about that. And you're the expert in that area. I'm not. I love learning. So let's learn with Jessica today. Okay. So tell us, what is EMDR, Jessica?
Yeah, so EMDR is a therapy technique, modality, certification that takes the intensity of traumatic events and dramatically decreases it. So using bilateral stimulation that crosses the pathway of the brain to not help us forget, because it's not Men in Black. We don't have the little memory eraser, but what it does is it desensitizes somebody to a trauma trigger. A great example, one that I use often in therapy with clients, is let's say somebody had been sexually assaulted and their perpetrator wore a certain type of cologne or perfume. And I'm walking through the grocery store and I have a cart full of food and somebody walks by with that cologne or perfume. I'm going to be instantly triggered by that. Hit that fight, flight, or freeze, and my brain's going to say, is that him or her? Is that the person that did this to
Yeah.
me? After EMDR, you're able to walk through the store, you smell the scent, but you're able to stop, process it, and say, I know that's not the person that did this to me, and continue your shopping. So it helps to just desensitize our body to those triggers from the traumatic event.
Wow. That's profound. I had a similar example. The family member I was mentioning to you earlier, she had a bad car accident, so there's some PTSD related there, along with all the other stuff I mentioned to you. And we would be driving on the highway. She had a hard time just driving on the highway in general from that point forward, understandably so. And we would, even after years after, we would be driving on the highway and pass by an 18-wheeler or something, and she would kind of freak out. And I'd have to go a lane over if it was available in order to provide some space there. And so she went through EMDR, and I was sharing with you how she struggled for the better part of 30 years and went through EMDR. And after 2 years, we had brain specs to prove that the frontal lobe of the brain is calmed down, and PTSD is probably not an active diagnosis for her any longer. And she was able to work through a lot of that stuff, and now can self-soothe, I think maybe is a good term
Mhm.
to use in the moment, right? And so, yeah, that she has those triggers, but she's gotten to the point where she can self-soothe in those moments and bring herself back, ground herself, I guess is probably a good route to go as well. So for me, not necessarily for our listeners, I'm going to be honest. Dumb it down for me. How does EMDR work?
Yeah, so it takes the traumatic event and the senses. So taste, smell, sound, and it rewires it in our brain so that those things are not sensitive to us anymore.
I love that. That's about as dumbed down as it gets right there. It is. It's interesting. She would share with me kind of the process that she went through, and it's really neat how the EMDR approach allows you to kind of re-experience in a way what's happened, but reframing it so it's not controlling. Is
Yeah,
that
there's
is that fair to say?
absolutely, yeah, a core belief aspect of it. So in part of the process, there's something called a target sequence plan. And the target sequence plan identifies what is the negative core belief that the individual has about themselves connected to the traumatic event, and what is the positive belief that they want to have post the EMDR. And then as they're rewiring the brain during the bilateral stimulations, they're reinforcing that positive belief, which is backed by evidence and things that the therapist is able to point out to challenge the negative belief.
Mhm.
And then by the end, the reason that it is so much less sensitive is because that negative belief is reframed and now it's a positive belief.
Wow. Where the mind goes, the body will follow. I am a
Yes.
firm believer in that. And so, if
Yes.
we can get a hold of a lot of these faulty beliefs that have been created through our own experiences in life, good, bad, and ugly, we can get a handle on those and reframe those in a way that works for us. It's pretty powerful stuff. And so, like I said, I've got quite a bit of experience with the process from a distance, allowing this family member to go through it and seeing the progress, and then the brain spec scans to prove it. And so, I know how effective it was for us as a family system. I want to hear your expert thoughts on like how effective is this for folks that pursue EMDR?
So in a lot of the research, it's very high effectiveness. So typically 90 to 100% effective for an individual that has a single traumatic event, and about 70 to 85% effective for individuals that have more complex trauma or multiple trauma events. There's a couple of different ways. So EMDR, EMD big R is like what we call free association. So it allows the brain to process any and all memories connected to the traumatic event. You can also do what's called EMD little r. And in individuals with complex trauma, we typically would start with little r because it takes single episodes of trauma and focuses on just that episode. So sometimes we could see a waterfall effect of, okay, if I process the touchstone event or the very first traumatic experience, will it also improve these other traumatic experiences? Or then do we come back and do EMD little r on these other episodes as well?
Hmm.
But it's breaking it down. It also helps with the patient's ability to tolerate, like free association can be really powerful, and it can be really overwhelming. So breaking it
Yeah,
down sometimes is easier, but definitely extremely effective and in a shorter timeline. So, sometimes it's 3 to 4 sessions and a person is 100%
yeah,
improved.
yeah.
Whereas in talk therapy, we typically are seeing much longer therapy episodes.
Real talk. That is good. That's about
Mhm.
as true as it gets right there. And I had the same experience with this family member. EMDR had so much more of an impact, so much quicker, so much more effective, so much more efficient. And I literally would drop them off for counseling, and afterwards, I swear I saw a difference
Mhm.
literally within that hour. I mean, it was crazy just to watch them kind of evolve as an individual and kind of work through some of this darkness in their own life. But um, I'm going to take a rabbit trail here. Rapid resolution therapy. Is that like a isn't that related to EMDR somehow, or someone started? How is that
I think
connected?
it is related, and honestly, I don't know a ton about it, but I
Yeah.
have actually another clinician that had been through a training. It sounds very similar.
Uh-huh.
But I think EMDR is so structured and so evidence-based. It's kind of hard to mess up.
Yeah.
I think sometimes in other modalities and even talk therapy, there's so many different ways you can implement it.
Yeah.
That I think that's what kind of sways the effectiveness. But I firmly believe the reason EMDR is so effective is because it's trained very well, at least in my experience.
Hmm.
There's a lot of support and consultation for clinicians doing EMDR, and it is just so evidence-based
Yeah.
that I think that helps the effectiveness for sure.
Yeah, it is very structured from my experience, just from a distance as well. And I think it is one of those things, stick to the script and things
Mhm.
happen, right? Rapid resolution therapy, I think, was developed somebody related to EMDR. I'm not certain, and maybe we can do a podcast at some point on that. But I worked at a treatment facility recently in South Florida, and they use some of that there, and it's not as evidence based as EMDR, but I think it's a small stepchild of EMDR, maybe, I'm not sure, but a lot of the same similar techniques. So with EMDR though, who have you found that benefits most from the approach?
EMDR, in my experience, has been most effective with individuals that have a wide range of trauma. So one thing I think that people kind of categorize is like, oh, I only have PTSD, or I can only go to EMDR if I have major trauma, sexual
Hmm.
trauma, vehicular trauma, tornado. Really, I have seen people benefit from EMDR who have more of what I would call or define like compound trauma. So they have little things that happen to them throughout their life, or they have a poor relationship with a parent growing up that teaches them they're not good enough because they can't, impress their parent. And
Right.
those people I have seen be able to really do big R, EMDR, and let that free association happen from all of those experiences in their life, and like take off those goggles of that core belief of not being good enough, and really have a very positive experience. Of course, we know it's effective with those high toxic traumas as well. But I've seen such great effectiveness. Sometimes people like they come in this and they're like, oh, I don't really have trauma,
Mm,
and as we get to know them and more information comes out, you're able to say as a clinician, like, actually, this is trauma. Like, these were
yeah.
traumatic experiences for you. And so, yeah, they often have good success with EMDR.
Yeah. I've had the same experience myself in private practice and otherwise, when I was actually just talking to private client today before you and I hopped on, and we were talking about that and how a family member has had lots of loss but never really worked through it, and we were talking about how sometimes folks are afraid of working through what pain, additional pain that might bring, and some of them just don't recognize it as trauma or the influence it has on their life at all. And it reminds me, I used to work for the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and so we'd have community transition, community alternatives programs. So we'd have these inmates come in that are finishing the last 10% of their sentence. And so when I would meet them, we would do these assessments and get some additional information from kind of tracking the information they shared ongoing to make sure everything matches up and we're ready to transition them back into the community, hopefully in a healthy way. And there's not any recommitting crimes and that sort of thing. And it's so interesting how many I would talk to that had been in prison for like 20 years. And I would ask them about, yeah, history of trauma, et cetera. Nothing reported. And so it's like,
It's their
isn't,
norm. Like, they
yeah,
think that
it's,
like this is how things are supposed to be, and until somebody points out that you didn't deserve to have that experience, or you didn't deserve to be talked to that way, they're like,
yeah,
wait, this is abnormal. This is what I'm used to.
yeah,
So it's effective for those individuals with veterans and sexual trauma, all of those things, but also others can benefit from it too, even if they don't have such a high class, I guess,
yeah,
identify very clear trauma in their
yeah.
experience.
Yeah, it's a great process to recognize what trauma has happened in your life, is what I was getting at. It's sort of like
Yeah.
these guys, like you said, this is their norm. Like seeing someone beat up, killed, maybe even raped in prison. I mean, all
Mhm.
this violence is something that they're used to on a daily basis. So it's not really anything off the radar. It's not trauma to them. It's everyday life. And so that's why they didn't report it. And so I say all that to say that there's a lot of times that things happen in our lives and we don't realize, like you said, that it is traumatic and we do need to process through that because it is affecting us on a daily basis. So when someone comes in to do the EMDR process, is there any prep work, like any preliminary stuff that has to happen, or do you guys just jump straight in and here we go?
Yeah, there's definitely some preliminary stuff that's really important. The first phase of EMDR, so like after the assessment, and if we identify, or at whatever point in the therapeutic relationship we identify, like, hey, I think EMDR could be beneficial. The first phase of it is what they call, or what in the training they call resourcing. And so resourcing is the piece where we identify what are their coping skills, what are the things that are going to help them, because really a lot of the processing actually happens in between sessions. It's like you open up the neural pathway during the
Mm,
session and then processing continues. So you want to make sure that the client has the support that they need to really be able to sustain the processing that's going to happen in between. So one of the, I mean, deep breathing is a big one, and there's a lot of different like techniques, and you model it and practice it and find which one works best for them. But the two that I use most often for EMDR is the container and the secure place. So a container is a visual, so imagery is a big part of it, but you develop this container and say, you know, when you're in between sessions and there's something that pops into your mind that's a thought that's so overwhelming, you can't or don't want to manage it, and you want to save it for therapy, they visualize putting it in their container. They use bilateral simulation to reinforce that it stays there. And then we bring it back out when we get to session. And secure place is similar. It's a place that is secure for them, that they can it's got a grounding technique that they can stop and ground themselves and take themselves to that secure place for a little bit to reground and get back to that front brain or that back brain where they can like really calm down and use those coping skills. So those are some of the big prep things that we always
wow.
do before jumping in.
And bilateral simulation. So this is something they explain that briefly to me, dumb it down for me. But then also, this is something obviously they can just do on their own at home.
They can. So bilateral stimulation is anything that crosses from the left hemisphere to the right hemisphere of the brain and back. Typically in a therapy session, it's done with like finger movements where a therapist holds their finger up, we're sliding them back and forth. Patient's going to follow with their eyes. But it can actually be done. And in the resourcing, it's taught to be done by tapping. So you can cross your arms and tap bilaterally. Patients can tap their feet bilaterally, you know, left foot, left foot, right foot, or you can sit in a chair and use your fingers and tap on the top of your knees. So it just goes left,
Interesting.
right, left, right. Um, in virtual EMDR, you can actually download a light bar for your computer, and the light moves back and forth so the patient's eyes can follow.
That is cool.
It's really cool. You can do light bars in session too. My actual favorite is I call them buzzies. Um, so one of the big things with EMDR is in order to complete the training, you actually have to go through EMDR yourself.
Mhm.
It's part of the training. And so I could not get there with the finger movement. And so they gave me a set of buzzies, and they're two little um, buzzers, and you hold and they vibrate, and you can increase or decrease the intensity, how fast they move. And so it was really cool. It allowed me to just kind of close my eyes and hold the buzzies, and that gave me the space that I needed to like
Wow.
really zone in on it. And so when I'm in person with a client, I really like to use the buzzies.
That is cool, man. And
Mhm.
so the virtual approach doesn't hinder this EMDR process at all.
It has not. Nope.
Wow, that's amazing.
Mhm.
So we have therapists, obviously you're one of them
Mhm.
with DCT that do this, and that's phenomenal because I know there's folks that I don't do it. I'm not certified in it. I've been wanting to do it for some time and just honestly have never prioritized it, gotten around to it. But I'm grateful for people like you and the individual that served this member of my family that got him in a good place. And so I'm grateful that you guys are available even within the DCT network so we can refer folks to you. And certainly we'll do that, folks. If you join us on online on the DCT platform, if there's something if there's the situation where we feel like there's going to be more progress, more work done with someone that specializes in EMDR, we'll make that referral. We want the best for you. So glad that we have these resources available. So how long does the session last? Is it a normal session? Is it longer, shorter?
So it kind of varies. Typically it is a standard, in the training, they teach you how to do it as a standard 50-minute or hour session. I have had sessions that have gone over because if a client is right in the middle of processing, you don't want to just kind of nip it. So
Mhm.
if it goes a different direction than maybe you had planned, but typically it is a standard hour session. You kind of review the resourcing, ask them about any processing that happened initially, and then you jump right back into where you were in the previous session for processing. Process through like 20 to 30 minutes, and then close off anything and put it in the container before they leave. If there is anything that they can identify that's lingering that they want to wait till next session to come back to, and check in and make sure that, so there's some scales that you rate them on. So, validity of the positive belief and also like the intensity of what they process. So you want them to be on a lower intensity level before they leave the session.
So that is amazing. That's almost creepy. It's so cool, like super grateful for big brains like you that can do this kind of stuff because it's changing lives. I mean, like I said, this family member, better part of 30 years, just struggled and didn't have the resources, didn't have the support, and less than 2 years. And this is not, it wasn't even every single week. It
Yeah.
was amazing the process that took place and completely transformed their life and gave them control back of their life again. And so wish that for our folks as well, whoever decides to come and join us at 24/7 DCT. One last thing, Jessica, we often have listeners contact us with general questions, and I always try to make an attempt to answer those on the podcast. So this week, a listener was wondering if I'm feeling down and depressed, what can I do to help my mood? As a therapist, what would you offer as this input there?
As a therapist who's a Midwest therapist, one of my favorite things to suggest is sun. Like
Mm,
just, we go through in the Midwest that period from November to February, March that is so seasonal depression. I mean, so many
yeah.
people experience that. And once the spring weather hits and people are able to go outside, and so if you're in an environment or a situation where you can go outside and do something, whether it's a walk or exercise or even just sitting in the sun, that's one of my favorite things to suggest. The other piece for depression, reach out and get some help. There's a lot of different ways that you can address depression. For me, I'm a CBT therapist. So I'm looking
Mhm.
at like, what is the thoughts? What are the things that are driving the depressive symptoms, and how can we reframe the thinking around those things to have a more positive outlook? But exercise, eating healthy, finding things that do bring you joy, and really challenging yourself to engage in those things. Because I know sometimes when we're depressed, we just don't feel like doing anything, but a little
Yeah.
bit of exposure therapy of getting back out there to those happy things sometimes can help.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. That's a very holistic response. Thank you for that. I lived in Michigan for a while, 7 years. My wife's from Michigan, and my experience was no different. Like I'm a sun, I was born and raised in the Southeast, so sun was my thing, like my whole life. It was like even in the summer or even in the winter time during Christmas, I can remember waking up a Christmas morning at 71 degrees outside. So the way we always had sun, even when it was raining, the sun was out for some reason, right? And so when I was in Michigan, that was a big hit on me. So I was taking vitamin D12 when I was, or D3 when I was up there because of that. It was hitting my mood so heavily that I had to implement a supplement in order to get through those winter months when it's just nothing but gray skies, as you well know. And I love that approach that start with the basics. I do that with clients all the time. It's like, hey, I'm super depressed. It's like, hey, first of all, when was the last time you went in and had some blood work done?
Yep.
Let's start with the basics. Is your iron low? Or is there some kind of inconsistency within your blood work that might be causing some of this depression? Or is this something from your past that hasn't been worked through? Is it whatever it is? But I think I loved what you're talking about with exercise and diet and sun. Like start with the basics. What can we do right here on the surface that's going to change this starting now? I think
There's
that's
even
a
light
great approach.
bulbs. You can swap out light
Yes.
bulbs in your house that give off positive, like the good vitamin
Yeah.
rays. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
let's do that.
Right on. A lot of people use those in Michigan during during the winter. That I
Yeah,
didn't even know anything about them until when I lived up there, and I was just kind of like, wow, this is really cool, and they're super effective. It's the real deal. So, thank you. I appreciate that, Jessica. Hey, thanks so much for joining me today and sharing so much about EMDR. I think this is next level stuff, and certainly want to provide that as a resource for folks at DCT as well.
very cool. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. If you're interested in engaging with therapists like Jessica, you can find more information online at 247dct.org. So don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to join you today, folks, in sorting out all that stuff that seems hopeless and get you back on track. That brings us to Real Talk with Brian, and this week's encouragement is brought to you by Will Rogers, who said, "Don't let yesterday take up too much of today." I've been so driven lately by this concept in that I've been challenged by some of my past and had to combat those thoughts with my current truth. And I even made a post on a weekly trilogy post on LinkedIn. I do that every week. And based on this metaphor that was offered by Alan Watts, he used a boat on a river as a metaphor to show that the weight behind the boat is our past and the motor is our daily mindset that propels us forward. And he was encouraging us to avoid focusing too much on the past because it will hinder our future progress. Interestingly enough, when you're in the wake, if you were to jump off the back of that boat into the wake, it churns you up and propels you even further backwards. Great metaphor for staying out of the past and in the present so we can propel to the future in the way that was chosen for us on our journey. So this week, folks, be intentional about positive self-talk and base that on your current successes, because we all have them, even the smallest successes to build on. And today is all that truly matters. So I encourage you to make that your focus this week. Be sure to follow my weekly trilogy series on LinkedIn at hashtag BeRealWithBrian to gain insight in the areas of mental health, addiction, and general wellness. I appreciate everyone that joined us today. If you're interested in gaining practical advice and expert insights for living your best life, join us weekly on Let's Talk Mental Health for support and to connect with others that genuinely get where you're at. Again, you can check us out on all major social media platforms by searching 24/7 DCT and online at 247dct.org. We look forward to spending time with you next week as we welcome yet another guest who's committed to getting you feeling better.